Hello and welcome to DC's Panorama. I'm your host, Maggie Linton. DC's Panorama gives a voice to those who don't get a vote on the Hill. DC's Panorama digs deep into politics, arts, culture, art history, and issues facing metro area Washingtonians. Today's special is Aging Better Than Wine. Don't we all wish we could age better than wine? One way is talking about the issue of social isolation across our aging nation. Here's the first of a series of videos developed by the Foggy Bottom West End Village and the DC Office on Aging. The topic, defining isolation.
I would define social isolation as lack of meaningful contacts with other people.
Social isolation is being isolated from people or activities that you care about.
I come across seniors who are home all the time and they are isolated from their friends and their colleagues for a number of reasons.
Social isolation is when somebody is not actively engaged in some sort of community. It can be either voluntary or involuntary.
We can see it when it's clear that the person's level of interaction is not enough to keep them feeling healthy, happy, and productive.
There's two kinds of isolation, and we can look at that in different ways. There's isolation from other people. You're not seeing people every day. There's isolation from purpose. You don't have meaning in your engagements with people. And I think both of those are damaging to people.
The data is very clear about the impact of isolation and loneliness on all variety of health factors.
If you have some cognitive changes, you may actually become more fearful of engaging with others because you may forget names or you may forget where you met that person. And so in social interactions where you used to be highly fluid, you may find that you are more reluctant to expose cognitive vulnerabilities and you might progressively reduce your social network. So that's a cognitive reason. A physical reason is when you have less ability to move. So that's fairly evident. The third, with emotion, if you have depressive symptoms where you just don't enjoy interacting with others, then you are going to restrict that and you may not treat the underlying cause, which is potentially related to small vascular changes.
People in later years of life are often left with a sense of loss of what they had. And if that isn't filled in with other productive activities, with finding meaning, then new emotional issues can crop up like depression. And if we lose a partner or we lose our friends, then another challenge that we often see for people as they age is loneliness and becoming more disconnected, more removed and isolated, which can be very damaging and destructive and can lead to depression, anxiety, which can lead to a variety of health issues.
So we may incorporate social stereotypes that now that I'm 75, I ought not to be doing certain things, even though you know that you're still perfectly capable of doing it, but you play this mind game on yourself and start to believe those social stereotypes and myths.
Sometimes your health starts to deteriorate and you keep thinking you're 20 years old, but your body is telling you you're not any longer. So their body doesn't do as well for them. And then they get very uncomfortable and you can start seeing some of that, what we'll call some anger that may come up because, as they say, the body is failing, but they still want to activate, and then they eventually give up.
Susan Haight was one of the founders and the first president of Foggy Bottom West End Village. As a resident of the West End Foggy Bottom neighborhood for over 18 years, Susan is also an advocate for the DC Public Library, a great resource for seniors in Washington, D.C. Lee Simplis joined the Foggy Bottom West End Village as the executive director in March of 2017. She has more than 20 years of corporate experience with global online information companies, including LexisNexis and Bloomberg. Dr. Connie M. Webster is the current host of UDC's Health Matters cable TV program. She has served as the past chair and director of nursing for the University of District of Columbia's nursing programs. She is a registered nurse with more than 45 years of clinical experience. Okay, ladies, let's get started. Our conversation today is about the need for people to understand the social isolation and the series that we're going to be talking about. How did Foggy Bottom West End Village begin?
I'll take that one.
Okay.
It started over 7 years ago, and with a group of people that I call them the mavens of our neighborhood, talking, all of us single, no family in the area. And the thought was, what are we going to do when we get 70, 80, and hopefully beyond that? So we thought, well, we had heard about the village concept, which started at Capitol Hill in DC, but it's also comes from, started in Boston, actually. So we decided that we would start it, and what it is it's an organization that helps neighbors help neighbors. So we try to have volunteers help people in their homes and to have people stay in place and age in place as long as possible.
Well, we've come back around to social isolation.
Right. So we teamed up with the DC Office on Aging and partnered with them to help to study how do you identify people in their homes who are socially isolated. So we created a toolkit, a questionnaire on ways for all the villages and the Office on Aging to identify seniors who potentially might be isolated. And then we created strategies to help them to combat the social isolation that they might have.
And, you know, it's something that's easily identifiable, but not always easily defined.
Right. It's sometimes easily identifiable. It depends on where you are when the telltale signs occur.
Well, talk about some of those signs, though.
Yeah. While you were talking in specific, I thought about, communities knowing who's in their communities. Because how many times do we let the garage door open, get out of our cars in the garage, go into the house, get back into the car and leave, and it's not that visitation down the street anymore. But it's very important to talk about social isolation and all of the body of work that's been done so far. There has been a hard core problem with investigations trying to define exactly what it is because we're not all alike. There are different personality types. An introvert might not see themselves as socially isolated, whereas an extrovert comes out and zaps up the energy of everybody in the room. And I must say before we go any further that social isolation, while we're talking about it in the elderly, social isolation occurs across the lifespan.
Yes, it does. Yes.
Mm-hmm. And it's very important to talk about for this particular age group because of its prevalence. And if you think about it, we're talking about people who've lived a long time. They've had lots of life experiences where they've lost significant others and friends. They've retired from a job and lost contact with their coworkers. Their children have migrated and taken on their own lives.
You know, when I think about social isolation, though, I think about in the summertime when it gets too hot and in the winter when it gets too cold, they say, check on your neighbors.
Absolutely.
But isn't that something that should be done all the time?
It should.
But I think it's kind of hard. Where we are in Foggy Bottom West End, we have a lot of high-rises. And what I found fascinating is that people who are in the Foreign Service, have been in the Foreign Service, they bought a condo when they were 40, and this is their one asset, and so they travel all over the world, have magnificent experiences, come back home, move in, and realize they don't know a soul.
I think the other thing that's very important when we're talking about social isolation, and especially the contact part and engagement, it begs the question about not only the numbers, but the quality. Because one feels socially isolated when that engagement does not appear that you really care about me. So yes, the Meals on Wheels might be dropping off my food, or the visiting nurse might be coming in to take my blood pressure. But when we talk about social isolation and those signs and those symptoms and resolution, I think that it begs the question not only about the number of contacts and are we looking or whatever, but the quality of those contacts as well.
I think that's so important. One of the reasons why the Village model has begun to take off in the United States is that it is a grassroots organization made up of hundreds and thousands of volunteers. And it's a caring, empathetic organization. So when we send volunteers to check in on our neighbors, see if they need a grocery run or, someone to go and pick up a prescription for them, we also have that empathy. And a lot of our volunteers are becoming friends with the members that they support.
Right.
Really close friends.
Very important. Very important.
Well, for more on this subject, let's take a look at this video on the impact of social isolation.
Isolating older adults as a society, I think, is one of the worst things we can be doing right now. I think by 2030, there will be 1.4 billion people over the age of 60 in the world, and they have so much experience and wisdom and knowledge, and when they're gone, it's gone with them.
Social isolation costs our society a lot of money, $6.7 billion extra a year, because they become sicker, they become subject to premature cognitive decline, and all those things cost the individual. They have an individual cost and they also have a societal cost.
The impact of that isolation on society as a whole is that society is robbed of one of its great resources, which is what older adults bring to the party.
You can learn so much from seniors. They've seen a lot, they've done a lot, they can help you avoid mistakes that perhaps you make, and so I think we lose out. But more importantly, it's not healthy. It's not a good place for seniors to be.
If you start falling or you stop going out, you don't take your medications, you don't show up for your appointments, you become now a burden to other people to have to support you.
A lot of that comes down to the person's own individual view of nothing now new is possible. And you can, again, you talk yourself into that, and then that starts a spiral into isolation, most likely. A misread of the intentions of people who are concerned can lead to bad outcomes. So if the person perceives your concern about them as intrusive, then that interaction may not go very well.
Social isolation isn't just an issue for individuals. If we don't address this, especially with a population that is aging and most likely to experience that isolation, the cost, literally, the cost to our society will be tremendous, because social isolation causes a variety of health care issues. So we have a large aging population. If many of them are not being engaged in a way to increase their connection, we're going to have a huge price tag to deal with.
I don't know what the impact of social isolation is on our society as a whole, because I think that we need to better understand that. And I would ask, what is important to us as a society? I think that's an ongoing discussion that we need to have.
Let's discuss the difference between isolation and loneliness. Is there a difference?
I think that one leads to the other. I think that if you lose a spouse or someone you're very close to, or a close friend, you're lonely. You miss that person. If it then becomes overwhelming for you, you become more socially isolated, because you sort of transfer that feeling of loneliness, and it's too much effort to get involved, and it's too hard. And so I think one sort of goes into the other.
Isn't that also part of the grieving process?
Yeah, as Connie says, that it's everyone does it differently, and so you have to be really cognizant of what a person feels as they go through a process. But to me, social isolation is a bigger issue than I want to say just being lonely. Loneliness is one thing, but social isolation affects almost everything that you do.
Some of the literature, too, the way they describe social isolation, it's more of an objective standard. Right. So how many contacts do you have socially? And I think you mentioned this as well, Connie. And how many interactions do you have on a weekly, monthly, quarterly basis, whereas loneliness is more subjective. It's how does the person feel? Are they sad? Are they angry? Are they depressed? It's not so much whether they're not seeing people, it's really more about their feelings in terms of loneliness.
Now, have you heard the old phrase, I felt lonely in a crowd?
Yes.
We're social creatures, and how we manage and how we get along every day. And social isolation doesn't only mean the physical contacts with another person, but also, am I in an environment where there is an absence of health care, where transportation is very hard to come by, where I don't have a built environment where I can sit out in a green space and meet and talk with other people without the fear of violence and all of those things.
And another thing with loneliness, though, a lot of times it's something that maybe sneaks up on you. You don't even realize you are until you're like drawn within. Because I've seen friends who, like you mentioned earlier, that lost someone. And, you know, people will call and say, hey, do you want to go do? No, I really don't really feel like it right now.
The lack of meaningful contact. Like, you can go out and go to Whole Foods and go to Trader Joe's and say hi to Francis, who's packed your groceries for the last 30 years. You have a superficial conversation, but to have a meaningful contact and to have someone who knows you well enough to say, as you said, like to bring you out and stuff like that, it's the meaningful part of it that is, so it's not just going out and partying or going out and someone who you connect with, I think is an important thing.
Somebody you can tell your deepest, darkest secret to and get feedback. You have to trust whomever these contacts are and these engagements are. And you have to sit there all by yourself and try to work these things out. That's where the bad health comes along.
That's correct. I read recently that in terms of a physical risk factor, social isolation is equivalent to smoking 15 cigarettes a day.
Absolutely.
So we're at a critical juncture, I think, in terms of the impact of social isolation on our health and wellness. And I think you make an excellent point about we have to treat this just like we would any other kind of health issue at this point. And so how do we treat other health issues? It's all about prevention. So if we can find ways to prevent people being socially isolated, and we could start to become more aware of this issue and provide opportunities for engagement and interaction, I think we'll start to attack this problem.
You're absolutely right.
I was going to say, I know we'll get to this, but one of the things that I think the villages have done well, at least in our village, we have what we call affinity groups. And so I happen to lead the Walkie Talkies, which is a group that walks and talks. And it really works well because you know, exercise, and we have a clearinghouse, and we find out what's going on in the neighborhood and who did what, all that.
I was just going to say, you'd be pleased to know that doctors in the UK now, they're writing prescriptions for walking, for cooking classes. I mean, they're doing things to, again, to help address the issue as a disease. Exactly.
Absolutely.
You know, and that brings up the topic, the things that you have, low cost, that you've just mentioned, very low cost. But is throwing money at it a solution for the problem? Or is it concern?
You know, it depends on where they're throwing the money in terms of on the issue. The research has shown that individuals who are socially isolated have a larger incidence of common illnesses, the colds, the flu, and even major incidences of cancer, hypertension, cardiovascular disease. That's big money. And that's where they're putting, it's sort of like a Band-Aid treatment. It's, the horse is out the barn then. I think that now that money is drying up for nonprofits, money is drying up for research, we really need to look at how we can do it through a multidisciplinary approach with low-lying fruits, involving our churches, involving our community organizations, involving the emergency responders, anything that we can do to get the village. It does take a village. It really does.
Yeah.
But I also think that you're saying concern, that I think that we have to be coached in how to be concerned. And I do think that the village model helps with that. We have several of our members that live in one building, and it's as simple as it is they send an email every morning. They say, I'm alive. Are you alive? Yeah, I'm alive. And it goes around. It's like a little trail.
Yeah.
And yet it sounds sort of silly, but it's not to them, because if Matilda doesn't answer, between 8 and 8:30 that she's okay, there's people at her door. But it's having the ability to set that up and to be concerned enough to say, what's going on with my neighbor?
And open up a way, for them to start talking.
Very true. Well, for more on this area, let's take a look at some other experts who discuss recognition and diagnosis of this growing social isolation problem.
If we pay attention, we can see the signs that somebody is becoming more isolated. They're literally doing less. They have fewer connections with people around them. They might refuse opportunities to go out and about, and they may seem less able to interact effectively.
When you say, let's go out, and they go, no, I would rather not go out. That's usually the first one. It's when they start, rejecting invitations. Or they say, I don't really feel well today. Would you go out and get me something? They have lots of excuses. Most of it is, I don't feel well today, when they don't want to come out and play, so to speak. But those are usually the indications is when they stop showing up.
I think that the primary symptom is an unexplained change in very consistent behavior that you've observed over time. And that will work for introverts, extroverts, whatever. So if you understand how they've behaved over a reasonable period of time, and they're now acting differently, that's the trigger.
Loss of friends, people move away, people retire, they move away, family members move away for work reasons. Your spouse may die, children may pass away. The longer you live, it's more likely that you may have a child that will pass away.
It's really hard to ask somebody, will you come out? Will you join me? A lot of people are afraid to ask because they know they need additional accommodations. They can't maybe hear as well, they don't see as well.
Hearing impairment. The idea that hearing impairment actually could cause social isolation, it makes a lot of sense, but it hasn't been studied, and there are easy solutions for that. It's just that we need to better understand how that contributes to social isolation, because then we can have forums like this that allow us to actually talk to people about destigmatizing a hearing aid, for example.
The way sidewalks are designed can keep people in their homes, or the stairs that they have to go in and out of to get outside can keep people isolated.
If you see someone you care about, if you have an older relative or friend or coworker, and you see these signs that clearly they are not doing as well as we would like them to do, say something. Reach out, offer to help, offer to be part of the solution. That will move that needle so that people start to have conversations, and people do not suffer, and they don't spend their time alone, isolated, lonely, and depressed.
I think the whole notion of social isolation raises the concern about how do we keep people connected in ways that are comfortable for them. And I also think it's an issue that we're going to need to pay a lot more attention to as the number of people who live alone and are aging continues to increase. Because again, we can misread situations. Just because you live alone doesn't mean you're lonely.
We know that our seniors who are depressed, one of the factors that contributes is they start to feel as if they are a burden to others. They start to feel as if they're no longer needed, they're no longer productive, their families would be better off without them. These are things that people will say as they're contemplating taking their own lives. And so family members need to take that all very seriously. They need to watch for signs that their loved ones are pulling away socially, but also pulling away emotionally, and communicating that they are feeling as if they're no longer of value. And when you see that, that is a clear indication that we need to step in, We need to remind, we need to engage. Ask our seniors to help us. Give them a role that is genuine and real. We need them. We need to tell them in many different ways how much we value them so that they are continuing to be productive members well to the end of their lives.
By the year 2025, approximately 18% of the world population will be seniors. All of us, huh? It's no longer a phenomenon to pass the 100-year mark. As of 2010, DC's elder population was close to 100,000 and is now much higher. So, how are we going to serve this growing population effectively? I guess a lot of what we've just been saying. Huh?
Yeah, I wish I had money because I would have a multi-dimensional business. One to party, one to take care of the healthcare needs, sitters, and everything, because it is going to be a problem as we are living longer.
I have a really positive view of this because we're the generation, we're the baby boomer generation. Yeah. We created sex, drugs, and rock and roll, or at least we think we did. So we're going to create another way to go about this. And one of the things that excited Lee and I about the village is that each village is different. And so to me, it's really interesting how innovative people have been about approaching this with their members, and then they go out and with their family.
I totally agree, and I think the village movement and other types of organizations focused on seniors today are thinking outside the box and are thinking creatively about aging and aging in your own home and what we can do exactly. In the DC area, of course, we have senior wellness centers, and those are very important.
You and I talked about this, but I read recently that the Remington shaver has created a new shaver that for people who may be immobile, like they're in bed, and you can't get under here without killing someone. So they have a new shaver, and this would be something that no one would have thought of 10 years ago, like to be able to have new products and things like that. So I think it's not going to be easy, but nothing's easy.
Right.
Well, I think about now when you go to corners, you know, there are the ways, it's not just for people with wheelchairs.
No.
It's for people who may not be able to step up as high to get onto that curb now. You can move so much more easily now. And it's like the powers that be are catching up with what is really needed to make it easier for everyone.
Now, I'd like to focus a little bit on another part of our city and our citizenry. There is a great disparity in many areas and inequities. And so my concern for how we will approach it has to do with the have-nots. People on fixed incomes, people who are living in areas where they're less educated, they're poorer, larger families, and these are the ones who are more greatly impacted in our cities with social isolation. Even now with so much cultural diversity, the diversity in our communities. In some communities, even cultural differences lend itself to isolation. It is really going to take a village or a group effort for us to be ready and for us to deal with it. And one of my other greatest concerns as a healthcare provider is how do the millennials perceive what is going on? Yeah, we're going to be old people. Many of us already have our foot in the front door. But the millennials are the ones that are going to be passed on with taking care and being creative and doing things to help eradicate this problem.
Well, isn't it that much more important for them to start getting involved early?
Absolutely.
Rather than waiting until?
Absolutely. Not only just for what it takes for the community and for others that they may have contact, but for themselves. Just like you plan for everything
I think
else.
at any given time, there are like 8 to 10 people that can simply talk about what they're going through because you think that you're the strong caregiver, you know all the answers, or you have to know the answers, and you don't. And it's very rewarding and refreshing and helpful to know that someone across the table has some of the same concerns you do, that you can exchange information and network and things like that. So the teaching of caregivers and the appreciation of caregivers is a big area.
And that's another thing that really needs to be talked about, because a lot of times the caregiver may be struggling, and again, causing that isolation is the fact that they don't know who to talk to when they need that help.
Yeah.
And that's what's so important also.
Yeah.
But when we talk, and I'm talking now about clinical practice, and when we're talking about the burden that the elderly, and especially the isolated elderly, brings into the healthcare arena, we're talking about a significant cost. But what types of resources and wraparound services can we ensure that they will have to give them a better quality of life?
But also, so often, don't you feel that the isolated person is feeling guilty for being the burden?
That's
On
probably
the
one of the
caregiver?
underlying causes that I isolate. I've been independent. I'm not going to bother people. And so
That's very interesting you say that, because we do have the village model. We're here to help with any kind of services, but so many folks just will not ask for help.
Absolutely.
We do have a licensed case manager, social worker, who helps us with talking to some of our members and volunteers about the kinds of services we can provide, and kind of helps us break through in terms of providing that psychological or that feedback that only a trained professional can really help with. So that's helped us a lot.
And one point that I would like to add to everything that we've said is that there has to be a level of cultural sensitivity to all of these interventions. Because in all cultures, just coming in, trying to tell me what to do and get into, it's not acceptable.
All right. Well, check out this video dealing with the risk factors, triggers, and symptoms of social isolation.
Symptoms would be lethargy or disinterest. We're not seeing other people because we don't care about other people. We're too tired to do that. We don't think we have anything to contribute to that, so we're not doing it.
We lose family members, we often lose a spouse, we often see our friends dying, and so that changes our social network significantly.
It's really important that we tune into each other and recognize when somebody is hurting emotionally. The 5 signs of emotional suffering: change in personality. We can see that. When someone starts to change and you say to yourself, you know, mom or dad, they're not who they used to be, that should be an indication to tune into that. Withdrawal from someone's normal social activities tells us something. Agitation. If somebody's angry all the time and they didn't used to be, or they're agitated all the time, that tells us something. Lack of personal care. When someone stops taking care of themselves the way they used to, they don't go out for walks anymore, they don't dress up anymore, they're eating too much, they're not eating enough, tells us something. And finally, hopelessness. People will communicate when they feel hopeless, when they feel there's no point going on. They will say the words, they will tell us in their actions. Those things we need to pay attention to, and we need to reach out and connect and make sure that they know we care about them, and we want to help them figure out what's happening so that they can feel better.
When you give up that driver's license, the independence seems to go crashing down. Especially people in their 80s, as they have to turn it over because they realize that they can't drive any longer. That's a big issue.
I was knocking on doors, talking to a woman. Her husband had died 5 years before. He did all the driving, he did all the grocery shopping, he took care of all the bills. And the woman was virtually in tears because she said that, getting a cab was hard for her. And she literally poured her heart out to me that For 70 years, she didn't have to do any of these things. And her husband died 5 years earlier, her children live out of town, and now she's stuck in her home.
They would rather accept help from a stranger than have to go to their children and say, I need your help, because of the cultural context of looking weak and dependent to the children that you raised.
We need to tell them in many different ways how much we value them so that they are continuing to be productive members well to the end of their lives.
Are older adults harder to deal with from a healthcare perspective or from a social perspective? Are they similar and nearly the same?
Right off the top of my head, I could say yes. And then I would say, well, what do you mean by harder to deal with? Because if you brought me in a very young, traumatized individual, their primary needs may be equally as great as this older person that I have who is functioning at their maximum level. So it kind of depends on a lot of things. I would say that elderly people are people who have lived a long time and come to us in the healthcare agency with lots of baggage, socially, physically, emotionally, and spiritually, because they've had a longer time to develop all of these things. And I like so much your thoughts about what they're doing in the UK in terms of writing prescriptions for things that in many other ways are perceived as non-medical. A prescription for wellness, you know.
Cooking classes.
Cooking classes, doing activity things.
One of my very good friends, it was a vibrant person, and when she turned 65, the first thing she said to me was, well, I'm going to go into the invisible age. And I said, what on earth are you talking about? And she said, well, when you're 65, people, they don't look at you the same way. They don't listen to you the same way. You're not important. You don't have as much to give.
I think also when we were growing up, the baby boomers, our parents at 60 or 65 were looked at as old people.
Yeah.
And now there are people who are creating careers or starting a second or third career at 60 or 65. And, you know, they keep pushing it down the road.
Yeah, we have to keep in mind, too, the societal norms. There are some things occurring in our society that today that indicate being old and wise is not good. I'd rather have young and vibrant. Mm-hmm. So there are societal norms and trends that also impact.
That we're going to have to change.
Yeah.
There's about 300 villages across the United States now. As Susan mentioned, it started about 15 years ago in Boston in the Beacon Hill area. So it's about a 15-year-old movement across the country, and each village is unique, but it's all about neighbors helping neighbors. And it's a volunteer-driven grassroots organization where people are just trying to help all seniors stay in their home as long as possible and age the way we want to age within our community and staying within our homes. So it has taken off, and it is growing. And we've been a little bit quiet about it, I think, but it's starting to get a larger voice in the D.C. area.
I'm very optimistic. I am very optimistic, and that it's just going to just be like saying I'm going to tie my shoe. I'm going to join the village. I'm going to be part of that. That's what I'm optimistic about.
That's an intervention perspective for me to know that there's a village for me to join. So I think that there is an element of safety in that thought. Elderly are being preyed on every day. So if I know that there's a safe space and a safe group of people that I can go to for this problem or socialization or whatever, I think that I'm more likely to do that. So I think
Several
that's
of our members have signed up their parents, or signed up their
Yes.
their father or their mother, who like they know that there's this danger coming down the road, that they've lost all their friends, and so they will call Lee and say, "My father needs to join because da da da," and we bring him into the fold. Bring him in the fold, and then he's like exhausted because he's doing so much he doesn't know when to
Keep them busy. Yeah, I have a lot of friends who are retired saying I'm busier than I was when I was working full
Absolutely.
time.
Yeah.
Right.
But it also keeps the mind active too, which so many people fall into. You were mentioning many things, but the Alzheimer's and dementia, you see people withdrawing.
Absolutely.
They aren't working their mind. They're not doing
Absolutely.
anything.
Nothing is more stimulating than to fight against the dementia or these challenging things that may not be challenging to a younger person that we have to put our seniors through to keep them engaged just about activities around current events and what's happening today and those kinds of things. So I
It
think that
validates their existence.
Right. It could be something as simple as saying, I'd love to introduce you to Bobby, who really enjoys playing Scrabble. And we do have a game night. And would you like to come and join us? It's just engaging the person and drawing them in and just letting them try something that they have interest in.
Right.
And just because they say no one time doesn't mean you
was
shouldn't
thinking
go
of saying
back
that
and
and
try
say it
again.
again.
Right.
You know,
I was
'cause
just thinking that.
sometimes those people just need that couple more nudges to
Absolutely.
get out there.
Or it could be a test to see if you're really serious. Are you just saying that? If you don't come back again, she was just saying that.
Yeah, exactly.
But often there's, it works to have sort of a buddy system too. If there's
Yeah.
someone who's very, very shy, and
Yeah.
they're very reticent, and then we have the same person call on a regular basis and say, I'm going here, going there.
Right.
One of the things that we've talked about is like trying to solve the problems, but what are the risks we face as a society if we don't address these symptoms?
I think each generation become more marginalized. When I think that when I grew up, my maternal grandmother lived with us for 25 years, and so you knew, and maybe that's why you have a sensitivity. But now, everybody's so scattered, and I think that we'll become more scattered and more this generation and that generation and this generation, as opposed to being multi-generational. I think that, and that's a huge cost.
I think the health costs are going to be astronomical if we do not begin to get a handle on this crisis facing us in the country today.
I think that's very, very true. And from a philosophical perspective, I think that we'll be a failure to mankind. We are social creatures. We were put here to take care of each other.
We've talked a lot about what's been done, but how is the Washington, D.C. metro area dealing with these issues and the needs of seniors? You're all working together, is what I get, and learning more as you work together.
I've testified in front of City Council. Lee has. We've all done, and as painful as that is, if you've not lived to, you've testified in front of Human Services, for 18 hours. But it's to point up and point out to them that this is a need, and this is a need that we see in our little
And
community.
it's growing.
You see, and it's growing, and that we're very fortunate to have gotten some grants from the DC Office of Aging, and that came about because we all got together and said, wait a minute, this is a huge issue for the districts, it's cost.
Just building the awareness of this issue. And we did, work with the Office on Aging and created a series of educational videos to get the word out about what this crisis is all about and what we're facing here. So advocacy and really speaking up, and it's going to require, takes a village, right? It's going to require industry, nonprofits,
Yes.
faith-based organizations, and government entities to all work together to begin to address this topic.
As well as our academic institutions.
Correct.
I am very pleased to say that the University of the District of Columbia has an institute for aging. There's no other place better than an academic setting to start to do some of this preventative teaching that needs to be done with individuals.
And it also gets young people involved
We
with
must
the
get-
older
we
population,
must
and
get
that's
young people
that's
involved.
something that's so important.
Right. We must get them involved.
We have to.
Yeah, we must.
Yeah.
If we want to solve social isolation, especially among at-risk seniors, we need to all be involved. We need to all be educated on how to make sure that if someone in our life is experiencing that kind of withdrawal, that kind of isolation, that we take action, that we reach out and connect. We become part of the solution.
There's one major solution to these problems. Ask people what they want to enable them to be more engaged.
The number one solution would be asking people to engage with purpose, to give them a reason to get up and move. And that by giving them a reason not related to them, but related to helping others, that just it so happens that indirectly they're getting up each day, they're getting off the couch, they're walking out the door, they're just moving. And then as they move and help others, they're not thinking about the effect it has on them, therefore they're not thinking about how socially isolated they are.
There's this whole campaign, if you see something, say something. Well, that applies to people too. In this case, it's the other way around. If you don't see something, say something. Right? So if you don't see them for a few days, maybe they're on vacation, maybe they're not, right? Maybe they're not, maybe they're under the weather.
The more active you are, the better your health is going to be overall. We know that from the cognitive side, from the heart side, but showing up is a big thing. And I think the Village is one of the kinds of programs that actually offer a variety of things, and they reach out to people.
The number one solution for me for connecting people again and reducing social isolation is connecting elders to younger generations. That's where they're the most valuable and the most relevant and have the most to contribute.
Universities and colleges now offer wonderful opportunities. You know, I often think, gosh, I can't wait until I retire because then I can go back to school and learn things. Travel opportunities. Now there are these wonderful programs that allow seniors, whether they're living alone or still with their partner, travel with a group. And often those groups are mixed ages, which is also very important.
I think some of the ways that older adults can stay socially connected is by getting involved in their faith communities. One of the new things that people can do is the meetup.
The fun for me is to talk about these pieces of art.
I don't think that a lot of older adults are familiar with that, but I think we could educate people about it, and villages are designed to try to outreach and meet people's needs where they find them. I think it's a great movement, and I hope to see it grow, and I hope we get one in my neighborhood.
Some of my research actually shows that walking 1,000 more steps per day is related to larger hippocampus, and the hippocampus is so important to memory. So if we can show that just walking 1,000 more steps a day may be related to a larger hippocampus and to better memory, we think that that is a message that actually can encourage people.
We need our seniors' wisdom. We need their compassion. We need their perspective. And now, nonprofit organizations that serve other groups, children, youth, other at-risk populations, are seeing the value and the need to invite our seniors to be part of those solutions.
Go and find exciting opportunities that engage your brain. That's possible, but it may not actually be as effective as just asking them to help others. And so that's what our premise has been, is that rather than tell people exercise more, because exercise is good for both the brain and the body, eat the green foods on your plate and do something cognitively stimulating, we know that those are all likely to be good for you, but telling people to do it is different from actually finding ways to do it and to sustain it. And that's the challenge that we face in the 21st century.
And if we're going to have nearly 25 or 30% of DC residents be seniors by 2030, we're going to have to really look at as many ways as possible that seniors can stay right in their homes, in the neighborhoods that they love. And I think that villages really offer a great opportunity to do just that.
I think there's still a lot of work to be done to determine the best coordinated effort, but what we do know is that it won't be any one solution. It will be a collection of nonprofits, government, for-profits, faith-based, community response, the key really will be ensuring that they work together, that they are coordinated, and that they collaborate. And that is always a challenge.
So I think we have the resources to help these seniors. It's how do we figure out who they are and how do we get them the resources? I think it's our biggest challenge.
The beginning of the solution is to recognize the problem. We need all hands on deck. We need federal, state, and local governments, and we need to have every individual recognize that this is a big issue both in our country and around the world.
Some say technology is the key to eliminating social isolation, while others say it creates more isolation. Take a look at this video for some answers.
Technology is a tool.
Technology is a fantastic tool that can get us towards solutions. Technology is not a solution in itself.
Technology is a tool. It's part of a solution as long as it's used to help us better understand how individuals want to interact with technology. And therefore, I use technology quite a lot, but I don't use it as a solution. I use it to help me understand the solution.
There are also some very positive opportunities to use technology to help engage and educate and inspire and communicate with our loved ones, even if we're not with them day to day. Technology will be a solution that we turn to more and more in the future.
One of the reasons we used Skyping to identify changes in physical behavior and in physical perspective, because sometimes you'll see something on the screen that they won't tell you about. So those technologies are very important in keeping those connections there.
I'm particularly interested in how older people can make those connections with younger adults. How can we bridge that divide and bring those generations together?
I hosted 8 technology workshops for seniors in Ward 4. So I partnered with Verizon and we trained seniors how to use smartphones, how to set up a Facebook account, even how to get on Twitter. We know that people text message all the time. That's a great way to stay in contact with family and friends. Facebook is a great way for seniors to know what's going on even when they can't be somewhere.
We use the recording of a story and using a device or a virtual reality camera, whatever it might be, as kind of the cool tech carrot to dangle in front of young people. But what's really happening when they go interact with an elder and interview them is they're building these relationships.
We ask our volunteers to wear iWatches or GPS and accelerometers, which are ubiquitous. And the idea is that for people who are active, we're trying to understand where they most enjoy being active, and then use that information to inform the design of interventions for those who are socially isolated. And with that in mind, technology is helping us a lot to go beyond questions to say, well, these places are hotspots, for example, where people just enjoy being. And if we know these hotspots using technology, we will then find ways to get social isolated people to then engage in these locations. And so that's what we're working on now.
The AARP Foundation is now doing a pilot project using Alexa to cue people to activity. So Alexa might say, "Good morning, Linda. Did you know that there's going to be a coffee clutch at the corner of your block this morning? Would you like to go?" So we're piloting that with older adults, and we're going to be studying the results to see how effective that is.
We also need to make sure that what we don't see happening is that you now have retirement communities where the only contact that somebody has is with their smart device that talks to the nursing station, and the nursing station or the community people never actually engage with our seniors. That would be horrifying. Technology is a tool. It's not the primary or only solution to caring for people and making sure that they're connected.
Technology is always a tool. It's not the end goal.
But I think it's going to take some good old-fashioned neighborly love. People looking in for neighbors and checking in on seniors, and getting them out of the house. Getting them out of the house.
And one of the keys there, it has to do with technology. That we have been very lucky to have 2 or 3 interns?
2 or 3 every year.
From GW and from the high schools that teach our seniors how to Skype, what Facebook is. And it's really quite endearing to have someone who hasn't been connected to their grandkids,
Right.
and have them say, "Grandma, I didn't know you could Skype." Of course I can. Like, of course I can do that.
And they also begin to have this intergenerational discussion and
That
begin
is
to learn from their elders.
That is
and
critical.
It's been very enlightening to me, and I think just very important at this day and age.
Because we had roles. We
Right.
all have roles.
Right.
And when these young people come in and we're able, and that is where the contact really becomes meaningful.
But nothing beats human contact.
Right.
Got one more question here. In your specific roles, what do you think are the best ways to stay engaged or create new social connections? Let's start with you, Susan.
Be awake, to be as open as you can be to new experiences, and to just try them.
Lee?
I would say participate in learning programs and activities and just be more involved. Also, volunteerism is a great way to prevent being socially isolated.
My final thought would be a sincere sensitivity to its occurrence and a very structured and persevered way of finding a resolution.
Thank you for joining us on DC's Panorama, and thanks to you, our Washington area audience, for sending us your thoughts on this program and ideas for others. Send your comments to info@rrproductions.com. We thank the University of the District of Columbia TV and executive producer Ed Jones for helping RR Productions present this program. DC's Panorama, giving a voice to those who don't get a vote.